My friends, what we're about to hear now is not a genetic deduction from a TV political analyst, nor a rumor spread in the halls of Brasilia. It's the explicit, pathetic, and terrifying confession of Brazil's president, admitting to his own supporters his greatest and most unmentionable fear: the visceral panic of being captured. Yes, my friends, at the most recent PT convention, the atmosphere in the Expo Center Norte Pavilion in São Paulo was not festive, it was not triumphant, it was one of sepulchral tension. The images are clear and the media tried to hide them. While the bleachers were literally emptying in front of him, physically proving that the party's magnetic charisma has dried up and popular mobilization has melted away, Lula visibly uncomfortable. He used the national anthem as a shield and uttered a phrase that sent Northern Hemisphere geopolitical intelligence into full red alert. In the middle of a desperate plea for the left to stop treating national defense as a taboo, Lula went to the microphone and declared, "I want to be prepared so that no one invades this country to take the president.
And we need to invest in defense. I want to be prepared so that no one invades this country to take the president like he invaded."
Pay attention to the semantics of this verbal engineering. Look at the level of the statement. He didn't use the word overthrow. He didn't use the word defeat at the polls. He carefully chose the word take. Take where? Under whose jurisdiction? The answer to this question exposes the real reason why the PT, which spent 20 years running down, humiliating, and strangling the armed forces budget, now wants to open the nation's coffers to the Brazilian military. Him? He is not financing Brazil's sovereignty. He is forging the golden collar. That's our metaphor and today's reality. When a globalist leader loses support in the streets, he tries to buy the loyalty of the armed forces. He puts a golden collar around the generals' necks to turn them into a private militia. Today, we are going to break down the architecture of the nightmare that has kept the Planalto Palace awake since January 2026. But first, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like on the video, because it takes a lot of work to make it. My friends, to understand why an 80-year-old man is obsessively focused on his own physical safety and fearing an invasion, you can't look at the National Congress. You need to look at the federal courts of the United States and at the deadly plea bargain agreements made by global leaders of the São Paulo Forum, who have already fallen. Because in his panicked speech, Lula expressly mentioned the name of Nicolás Maduro. But what he hid from his supporters were the names of the generals and operatives that the Chavista dictatorship couldn't protect from the long arm of American law. There is a name that terrifies the leadership of the continental left. Alex Saab is his name. I repeat, Alex Saab. The business tycoon, financial architect, and logistics operator who held control of the weapons, money and gold routes of the Venezuelan regime, acting as Maduro's financial lifeline. Saab was intercepted, captured, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, and extradited to the United States. And when the U.S. Department of Justice machine squeezed him, the structure of the continent shook. And Saab's corporation is described today as gold, mapping every dirty dollar that crossed Latin American borders. And he didn't fall alone. We have General Hugo Carvajal, the feared El Polio, former chief of military intelligence under Hugo Chavez, also captured and extradited. Carvajal's testimony is a geopolitical bombshell that directly hits the arteries of the Los Soles cartel's drug trafficking and the political financing of the left over the past 2 decades. My friends, the situation is much deeper than it seems. Lula's fear is a psychological abstention. It's a tactical survival calculation. He is the close friend of Fidel Castro, the buddy of Hugo Chavez, and Nicolás Maduro's longtime political backer. What the president of Brazil realized is that the São Paulo Forum has definitely lost its protective shield of impunity and silence. The testimonies from Caracas, which are being filed in Washington and New York, are tightening an unrelenting noose around the power structure that dominated South America. If the ground is collapsing under the feet of the neighboring dictatorship, the smoke is already stinging the eyes at the Three Powers Square. And it's exactly because of this fear of international arrest that the PT's historic anti-military rhetoric was suddenly turned upside down. And here you should ask a question to the system, looking at the reality of the country. Do you really believe that the sudden increase in investments in the Army, Navy, and Air Force proposed by Lula would be to protect our borders from drug trafficking and smuggling? The Workers' Party has spent the last decades annihilating the defense budget and destroying the prestige of the uniform. The practical consequence of this rampant neglect wasn't just the lack of ammunition for training. It was the widespread loosening of surveillance of our land and maritime borders. They made it easier through energetic inertia for drugs and contraband to bypass protective measures. Today, it flows freely along our highways and dominates the port of Santos. Brazil currently has about 160 active generals with the mission of protecting continental territory and more than 200 million inhabitants. Meanwhile, Maduro in Venezuela, presiding over an economically shattered country with only a fifth of our population, where 25% of the people fled because of hunger, had an unbelievable 1,000 top-ranking officers. Let me repeat, 1,000 officers. Venezuela has more than 1,000 generals and admirals. And what are 1,000 generals for in a country that isn't fighting any conventional war against any foreign power? They exist exactly to form a corrupt Praetorian Guard. Maduro understood the brutal game of power. He tied the armed forces to the billion-dollar scheme of the Los Lusoles cartel. The Chavista model is buying loyalty through the systemic corruption of the military. The globalist system always uses the same play. Whether in Caracas or Brasilia, they disarm the ordinary citizen, destroy the family's ability to defend itself, and arm themselves to the teeth with institutional militias. But let's do a little visualization here to melt away any illusion you might still have. Close your eyes and go back to the 2005 referendum. The Brazilian people went to the polls and voted a resounding no to the ban on the sale of firearms. We said no. But the government, manipulating the system, ignored the people's sovereignty and disarmed law-abiding citizens. A family man, an honorable man, taking the Winchester .22 rifle he inherited from his grandfather, a historic registered firearm, and being forced to hand it over at a police station counter for a ridiculous amount of change, a state handout. The citizen was disarmed under the psychological pressure of a manipulated media and a wing of the Catholic Church dominated by liberation theology, which did in fact orchestrate campaigns for peace. And today, while that same mainstream media distracts the masses with populist headlines like "Find out if you have part of the 10 billion reais forgotten in the central bank," the real strategic heist is happening behind the scenes. The president, the same man who demanded your father's gun in 2005 to leave your home vulnerable, now wants to use billions from the public budget, your tax money, to buy a private army. He wants to tighten the golden leash around the neck of the military brass to make sure he won't be taken away in handcuffs out of the country if the wind changes. But pay close attention here, because we're going to put this scenario under the blade of our elite analysis. All this sudden display of nationalism, this talk about protecting the borders and our arms industry, it could be the most monumental strategic lie made only to generate votes from the patriotic base and to protect the physical safety of a cornered leader. Lula faces an insoluble and fatal dilemma. His ideology is and always has been viscerally anti-national. It doesn't make any logical sense. Or a card-carrying globalist politician who dreams of a continent without borders, guided by a progressive agenda and submissive to a single transnational government, suddenly wanting patriotic nationalist armed forces. True military nationalism, if strengthened with ethics, would spit him out of power in 5 minutes. The soldier who loves his homeland does not salute the dismantling of the nation, but let's suppose he manages to implement the Venezuelan model. If he creates a bought Praetorian Guard identical to Maduro's, forged by his golden leash, will he really be safe? My friends, look at the level of naivety in this plan. It's widely whispered in the back corridors of international intelligence that Nicolas Maduro himself, even surrounded by his 1,000 generals, has already been betrayed behind the scenes and handed over to the Americans by his own trusted men in an operation that still hasn't fully come to light. The rule of the golden leash is brutal, insensitive, and mathematical. Whoever pays more gets the dog. The more corrupt bootlickers and mercenaries in uniform you buy to protect you, the more potential traitors you put inside your own command room, ready to sell you out. The moment Washington's financial or diplomatic reward is greater. Would Lula really trust his life, his freedom, and his legacy to his co-opted generals? How long would it take for this military leadership to realize that facing the warlike fury, economic sanctions, and the power of the Department of Justice of the world's greatest military power could cost them their own lives, and the freezing of their secret bank accounts in tax havens? So that Luis Inacio stops being a radical globalist, a closet communist down to the last strand of hair, and a failed socialist and becomes a true nationalist. And capable of leading a real military resistance, he would have to be born again, and there's no more time left on the biological or political clock. An 80-year-old man does not lead an armed revolution. Without a loyal army, forged in ideology, and without paramilitary militias willing to give their lives for him in the trenches, the harsh and relentless reality is that the PT movement only has today on its side the stroke of Supreme Federal Court justices' pens, a portion of the old bankrupt corporate press, and the hungry mercenary slice of the Central. It's a house of cards built on a swamp, defended by rusty cannons. Now, to gauge the true extent of this desperation and the level of social and systemic vulnerability, we need to connect this fear of capture with the actions that have been orchestrated for more than 3 decades. Why would the United States arrest Lula? Look at this. At the same empty convention, the president didn't just talk about the armed forces to defend himself. He tried to rewrite the history of the continent. In the middle of his speech, he made yet another invaluable confession. Lula openly said into the microphones, "There was no conversation." When I created the São Paulo Forum in 1990, it was because I thought we could educate the left in Latin America through elections. And so we won several countries, he said.
The left didn't talk to each other. When I created the São Paulo Forum in 1990, it was because I had gone to the runoff against Collor, and I thought we could educate the left in Latin America through elections. I called all the leftists from Latin America to the Hotel Danubio in São Paulo in June 1990 to try to tell the entire left that the best way for us to come to power was not through armed struggle, but through organizing the people and direct elections, and for us to participate in the electoral process. And that's how we won in several countries in Latin America.
The mainstream media won't say that. He admitted from his own pulpit that he was the key architect of a transnational organization whose only practical and tactical objective was to interfere, hijack, and dictate the course of elections in neighboring sovereign nations from Brazil. For years on end, anyone who mentioned the existence or influence of this group, the São Paulo Forum, was immediately labeled a conspiracy theorist and ridiculed by the newspapers. Period. But there was the former union leader himself, proudly stating that the organization spread like a virus, securing presidential victories in Argentina, Venezuela, Uruguay, Ecuador, and Chile. However, the big and blatant lie he inserts into this proud confession is that all this transition of power across the continent was peaceful and unblemished. He had the audacity to say, competing for votes without killing anyone and without anyone dying. This is a historical lie of continental proportions. The revolutionary left in Latin America didn't trade the jungle for the ballot box, and they didn't abandon the dream of armed struggle from the 1960s for silk ties in the 1990s because they had a democratic epiphany. They did it because the world changed in a brutal way. The Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union collapsed miserably, and the billion-dollar pipeline from Moscow to Fidel Castro's guerrillas in Cuba dried up. The São Paulo Forum was not founded as a friendly debate club or an academic center. It was created as a formidable hybrid war machine. Pay attention, since international funding to buy rifles had ended, the new directive from Fidel and Lula was to infiltrate the electoral process. The interference of the forum was never limited to giving marketing tips among allied parties. Brazil, under the strict leadership of the PT governments, became the central bank for financing this Latin American axis of evil. Through the billion-dollar coffers of BNDES, hidden under the cynical mantle of integration and regional cooperation. Brazilian construction companies and mountains of public funds from your taxes were used to consolidate, finance, and elect dictatorships and populist regimes. From Cuba to Venezuela by way of Bolivia and Ecuador, it was the sweat of the Brazilian worker bleeding to artificially keep the continent's communist nightmare alive. Two classic examples of how they took money from BNDES to finance elections in those countries. First, the Caracas subway. Brazilian people's money to build the Caracas subway through the construction company Odebrecht. Remember Odebrecht in the car wash operation, which paid bribes so that left-wing PT politicians could get re-elected indefinitely? Another classic project, and it's amazing how none of them are in jail forever, was the port of Mariel in Cuba. Look, Cuba exports absolutely nothing to anyone. Cuba is an extremely closed-off dictatorship. Money from BNDES was used to build that port. To bring prosperity to the Cuban people? No. The money was diverted to finance political campaigns. This is the exact same power machine that Hugo Chavez confirmed in public videos that are still circulating on social media, where he details quite casually that bloodthirsty leaders and guerrilla fighters from the FARC were sitting, drinking coffee, and debating strategies at the meeting tables of the São Paulo Forum in San Salvador, at the invitation of revolutionary friends. The official guerrilla, the narco-terrorist organizations, and the political parties that claim to be democratic operated and still operate as an integrated whole. All under the same strategic umbrella, whose internet domain registration, it is worth noting, belongs to the PT itself. The strategy of Western destruction never ceased. It just swapped the mud-covered camouflage uniform for a well-tailored suit and the robe in the higher courts. And that's exactly why the fear of the current leadership of the system is now real, intense, and desperate. They spent the last 20 years perfecting their continental ground game. Their sneaky and invisible ability to mobilize money from schemes, interfere in the judiciary structure, and influence the mainstream media to secure narrow electoral victories. But for the first time in modern history, this apparatus is facing a reality check. The political system that always hid in the shadows has clashed head-on with a new global right, and ordinary citizens who have learned the brutal rules of information warfare. Lula's panic is not dictated only by court orders from New York judges against his allies. The panic is seeing that the media shield that protected them for decades has finally collapsed. The monopoly on the narrative is over. The schemes are exposed daily on open and decentralized digital platforms, driven by the uncontrollable chaos of a network led by Elon Musk's technological surveillance, and by the heavy shadow of an imminent resurrection of America's strike force, with Donald Trump in control of the global game, and this game has already begun. The American giant has just formed the shield of the Americas. A total and absolute siege of the São Paulo Forum. The foundation of the globalist system in Latin America has always depended on complacent silence and invisibility. And the moment the light comes on and the world's attention turns to them, capture, extradition, and downfall are no longer the hallucinations of a terrified old man. They have become merely a matter of time and bureaucratic procedure. If you've seen the engineering of chaos operating in your country and realize that their power is sustained only by a facade of authority that we can no longer tolerate, make your position clear in the comments now. Type the keywords from our intelligence verdict today: golden collar and exposed system. I repeat. Golden collar and exposed system. The algorithm needs to understand the strength of this community of analysts. Guys, definitely, there aren't only idiots in Brazil. There really is a powerful group that thinks for themselves, that thinks outside the box, and you are one of them. Now, the fragility of those who lose control of their own narrative is brutal. Whether in the chess game of high geopolitics or in the ruthless survival of the free market. The same pain felt by a political leader who sees their stands empty because they can no longer hold the audience is the pain that destroys great talents today. Because in the game of power and in market survival, those who are not seen are swallowed up. Today, the most valuable currency in the world is attention. As a business owner or top professional, the most painful thing is being the best yet still invisible. You have a great business, great knowledge, but no one knows you exist. Have you noticed how hard it is for people to absorb serious content on social media? It seems like only silly dances or pointless memes go viral. 15 years ago, on radio and television, I understood that the mechanism to build authority requires dense content and a lethal strategy. Today, I generate over 50 million views per month on my social media, monetized in dollars. The system is now proven. And now, with this knowledge in my hands, I'm recruiting entrepreneurs and experts who are the best, but remain in the shadows so they can break through the bubble, be recognized at the top, and have their expertise monetized. Because now, the game is about media. And those who understood this managed to break through the bubble. Your identity cannot be outsourced. The owner needs to put themselves on the line and direct the vision. Is the time over when you could just record a video with your phone any way you wanted and still get results? The digital world demands absolute professionalism to force the algorithm to work for you. So, on August 16th, I will do a 100% in-person immersion face-to-face with me inside my studio. Take advantage of this opportunity. The QR code is on the screen, the secure link is in the description and in the first pinned comment. But I'm ruthless. There are only 3 spots left. When the last spot is taken, the steel door closes and I don't know when we'll have another opportunity. So don't miss the opportunity to sit face to face with someone who does it, with someone who put it into practice. It's not theory, it's not just some video, it's not a motivational show. It's what I do, how I do it, tailored to your reality. Click the button now and join me. And I have a fantastic series that just premiered. Its first episode, guys, VCRA Visceral, which I'm going to recommend on our channel with tips about series and movies. It talks about the war between Ukraine and Russia, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and covers all the latest global developments. And you should know, in Ukraine today, the Third World War is already happening. Whether you like it or not, it's underway. So go there, the link is in the description, in the pinned comment. No woke culture, no whining, a curated selection of titles so you don't waste time looking for what to watch and enjoy with your family on the weekend. And if you found this episode important and wanted to reach more people on YouTube, there's a fantastic tool where you can sponsor this episode. Yes, there's the thanks button, the like, and you can put in the minimum amount. But it already helps boost this video to thousands and thousands of Brazilians. With a small amount, you help us reach those who need to hear this message. You can also get early access to content by subscribing to our channel, my friend. And if you want to be among the elite of analysis, join our club, our Bunker de Inteligencia, where more than 3,000 elite analyst members fund what we bring here. Link in the description, pinned comment and card. Now subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell and leave your like on the video because it takes work to shield your mind. I'm Shimon Oliveira and I'll see you at our next meeting. See you then.